that downloading an entire blockchain on your MacBook isn't exactly the best way to use your storage space. So props for the idea of light nodes coming to the market.
That is a true story.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Rollup. For today's episode, we had the pleasure to sit down with Nick White to discuss the Celestia roadmap. Recently published by the Celestia team, we discussed the path to 1 gigabyte blocks and what this means for scaling data availability for the entire Ethereum and Modular ecosystem. We had a chance to ask Nick about some of the technical challenges associated with scaling to 1 gigabyte blocks, whether or not we need more data availability and more block space, also where the novel applications are being built within the Celestia ecosystem. We discussed whether Celestia and Ethereum are long-term collaborators or competitors, as well as the vision to scale Celestia's light nodes to millions and millions of users who can verify the chain from any device. Super fun, semi-technical conversation. Let's jump right in, but after a quick word from some of our awesome partners.
Welcome aboard on our journey into the singularity. This is the endgame roadmap for Frax and Fractal, the new L2 out of the Frax ecosystem that is totally based on fractal scaling. Fractal is a modular L2 blockchain built by Frax with modular and fractal scaling in mind. Fractal scaling is based on the Mandelbrot set of fractal images, and it explains how L2s become L3s and the entire app chain lifecycle goes through its evolution. The Frax ecosystem is made of some of the top builders in the space and has stemmed from its OG days of the Frax stablecoin. It is now in the LST space, the LRT space, and this Fractal L2 joins the existing suite of Frax products, including Frax Swap and Frax Lend. You can see Frax Ferry, the bridge to go from any chain, Arbitrum, Optimism, or Mainnet into the Fractal Mainnet, bridge your tokens, and bring your Frax assets into the Fractal ecosystem. Join today to get the best out of Fractal. You are still early. Join today. Take part in our expedition into the singularity. Vertex Edge is now live on Say Network. Say users can now trade 50 plus spot and perp markets with the unified order book liquidity of Vertex Edge across Arbitrum, Blast, Mantle, and Say. The next 6 weeks, 850,000 Say tokens will be up for grabs as trading rewards every single week, exclusively on Say. Join Vertex on Say Network now on Vertex Edge. That's vertexprotocol.com.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Rollup. Today, we are going to be discussing the Celestia roadmap, which was just released following an interesting episode we had with Justin Drake about the Ethereum roadmap. Definitely going to be able to draw some parallels and quite a few differences and have some spicy takes for Nick to answer today. As best and as much info we can kind of soak in here today. Nick's rocking his favorite shirt, so love to see it. Welcome in, brother.
Hey, what's up, guys? Well, the spice must flow, so let's do it.
Yeah, man. So why don't we just kind of start with like the story of Celestia? I think it's super important for people to understand kind of like the founding mission, how this all came together, and kind of how this vision has evolved since Mainnet, which was almost a year ago now.
Totally. So Celestia started with this vision of building a new paradigm for blockchain infrastructure that would be modular in nature, and with the end goal of making it so that anyone could deploy a blockchain as easily as a smart contract. And when you deploy your application as a blockchain instead of a smart contract, you have all this customizability, you have sovereignty and control over the economics, you have better scaling. So that was really the thesis, the core thesis. And that still remains the North Star, but we've made a huge amount of progress. I think that just launching Celestia was a big step forward. I think we entered kind of a new era of abundance for blockspace and data availability. And we've had the first, data availability sampling light node. So like the core concept of this modular data availability layer focused L1 just for rollups has more or less been proven out. And now it's about taking it to the next step, right? And that's what the roadmap is about. It's, right now I would say we're kind of in the broadband era of DA, right? We have 2 megabyte blocks. We're going to be scaling that pretty aggressively over the coming years, but that's not enough to take us to, internet scale, global scale, crypto adoption. And that's where, this fiber era of data availability block space is where we want to go to next. And that's why the focus is on 1 gigabyte blocks, because we believe that that is really the kind of scale that you need to get to in order to enable like the next era of scalability. And we're also leveling up on all the other fronts. Light nodes are a core part of our differentiation, right? You can still verify the network, unlike a monolithic chain like Solana that doesn't support light nodes. End users are still going to be able to verify the chain when it's at a massive scale. And without that, you kind of lose the whole proposition of blockchains in the first place. And then, of course, there's a bunch of level ups that we're trying to target on the developer and user experience. Everyone's aware that the big problem in the modular stack is fragmentation. And we have to really take a stance and try to do what we can to fix those problems for the ecosystem. And so that's sort of like the core thesis of this roadmap, and how we think that we go from just like square one and 0 to 1 to 1 to n for Celestia and the modular ecosystem more broadly.
Yeah. And I mean, since the launch, I mean, we've seen the adoption of Celestia. I think there's like 20 something rollups on Selenium now. I know Eclipse has been publishing a ton of data as of recently, which has been great. What are some of the other kind of notable achievements that you guys have kind of had over the last 8 to 9 months since Mainnet? And also maybe you could highlight some of those innovative rollups that are a personal favorite, or just some cool ideas that you've seen and played around with on chain.
Totally. So I actually think, one of the things that kind of blew me away since launch is just how active the core developer community is. There've already been 24 CIPs. There's a ZK working group that is working on ZK accounts that has brought together people from Ethereum world, Cosmos world, like all over the broader crypto ecosystem. And there's like the level of involvement from really gigabrain people has just been like phenomenal to see. And again, like thanks to all those people, because they've played a huge role in actually shaping the roadmap and also contributing to shipping some of these milestones. So that has actually, been a real surprise to me. I think the other one, which you already mentioned to me, is the ecosystem growth. Really surprised me to the upside. I mean, we already knew that there was a lot of demand for people to build their own chains, launch their own rollups, but it's just actually kind of like exceeded my expectations in terms of the number of teams and the enthusiasm for this modular approach to building rollups. And I think the 20 rollups that are live now on Mainnet are just sort of like the tip of the iceberg in terms of like the total amount of new chains that are kind of in the pipeline. It still takes longer than you'd expect to launch a chain, and hopefully it becomes better and better. The reality is the modular stack as a whole is still relatively nascent, but there's just so much that's coming. And specifically the native ecosystem is something that I think is really poised for pretty huge growth over the next few months. Like we have Eclipse, they launched obviously already, but they're not actually open yet for users. We have Initia, which is, I don't know when they're going to launch, but they're getting me excited. It feels like it could be any moment now. And they're going to bring like over 10 rollups with them. Astria with Flame, Movement as well. Their testnet seems to be really successful so far. Rollkit and Sovereign SDK are both like incubating a bunch of sovereign chains. So there's just a huge amount of like growth on the horizon. And again, that's why like it's been such a so we realize that scaling is a really high priority, because even though it might feel like, oh, we have a lot of throughput to accommodate everything right now, literally Eclipse could turn on for users tomorrow and we could be congested. So there's actually a pretty extreme amount of urgency to increase capacity. So that's kind of like I'm glad it's a great position to be in, right? like every chain kind of wants to have enough activity to be congested. That's kind of like, kind of success in a sense. But the thing is that for Celestia, we don't want to have any of these outages like Ethereum where the fees spike so much it becomes unusable. We don't want to have similar problems to what Solana had like earlier this year. We want to continue to have a stable, scalable, abundant block space that can continue to scale with the ecosystem.
Yeah, and there's an element of almost induced demand by increasing the supply of block space. You guys are able to almost outpace the adoption, and then by opening it up, there's more scale, and then you end up in this element where, because there's more supply, projects are a little bit more apt to adopt it and use it and push some greater transactions through it because it has more abundance. And so it's almost like a seesaw effect where you guys can spiral upwards with your adoption. And you guys have had pretty significantly more adoption, especially more so than some of the other DA specific providers. And then Ethereum and its DA source as well is at that level as well. So when you're looking at some of the other DA providers that are out there, why do you think that is, that you guys have had kind of this level of success? Do you think it is kind of like the significant community push around modularity? Do you think it's a first mover effect of kind of pioneering this minimalistic blockchain design, or is it something entirely separate that differentiates you from some of the other DA providers?
Great question. So I think, right now, Celestia's DA market share is currently like 45% roughly, which again, like I'm really, pleasantly surprised by that, given that we launched 10 months ago. And I think the reason why Celestia has come out with such a bang is because we have been at this the longest. We kind of originated the idea of a DA layer to begin with. And, some people aren't aware of that because Ethereum sort of actually pivoted their roadmap to more sort of like emulate what Celestia is trying to build. But we were the first team to say, hey, we want to build an L1 that just does DA. That's it. And we were the original Rollup centric roadmap, if you will. We, as part of that, we ended up attracting this early nexus of builders, really high quality builders who were nerd sniped by this vision. And we've been incubating those teams and those ecosystems, those relationships for multiple years now. And so there's a kind of like a lot of just like momentum that's been building. You can't just start, you can't launch and then try to build momentum, right? Like we've been building momentum since like we kind of like started espousing this new modular way of doing things. So that's huge. I think we've also been deep in the trenches with those users and like helping them solve their problems and debug whatever is going on. Like there's, again, this whole tech stack is so nascent that it's riddled with problems, frankly, and no one's built a DA layer before, right? So we had an idea of what it should look like, but when you're building and when you're designing something in a vacuum, you can't really know ahead of time how it's really going to play out and work. And so by having these early testers and early partners who have been building stuff with us from before we even launched, we've gotten to use and leverage all that feedback. And again, that's informed the roadmap in a huge way. And I think that those relationships also then just lead to, and that stability, the fact that the product is better and more robust, more well tested, all kind of like, feed into each other to create, an effect where Celestia is kind of the go-to DA provider for the moment. I also think, one of the things that's been surprising to me is how sensitive a lot of these early users are actually to the scaling roadmap, because a lot of people who are building applications want to shoot, for the fences, and they are looking at where to build, and they're thinking like, well, is this DA layer going to be able to scale? Like if I have some, large amount of adoption of my application, I don't want to hit congestion. I don't want to be CryptoKitties, right? And so they want to also feel that you have a credible roadmap to scale. And so that's another reason why, we've spent so much time like really piecing together, okay, how can we feasibly get to gigabyte blocks so we can communicate that to the community so people can like trust in us and believe in the Celestia community to deliver that, right? Because when you're building on something, you're taking a risk, and we want to do good and honor people who are risking by building on something that's so new.
Could you expand on why is it that 1 gigabyte blocks is the North Star that you guys are moving towards? For anyone who's unfamiliar, like what is the significance of 1 gigabyte blocks and why are you guys prioritizing this?
So first of all, it's a good meme. just kidding. But it is. I mean, it's so clean, right? It's just like 1 gigabyte blocks. It's like, wow. And for me, like the first time I heard it and started like saying it and hearing it, it's just, wow. It's like, whoa, gigabyte blocks. Like that just sounds almost like blows open the Overton window of like what is possible to do on chain, you know? Like it's just a level of scale that just feels alien to us, right? We exist and have existed for the past 10 years since the inception of blockchains and crypto in this world of scarcity where it's like, you know, like everything on chain is really expensive and we, you know, we have to gas golf, we have to optimize, we have to, you know, worry about scalability. And when you say something like gigabyte blocks, it just like blows that out of the water. And you're just like, wow, what can we build? It forces you to dream bigger and think bigger. So I think that's a big part of it, right? Now, like more specifically, like why is scaling an abundant block space like a big deal? What does it unlock? Well, first of all, right, I totally hear the feedback that like, okay, well, we don't have, you know, no one needs gigabyte blocks right now. We don't even have applications that people want to use. Like we hear that all the time.
Yeah,
like,
I was going to kind of push you on
Twitter,
that
right?
a bit here. Like the blocks currently are still, you know, they don't get filled up all the time, right? So it's a big lofty goal for a small demand, but as you're kind of saying, the vision is kind of what supports the growth. But yeah, I was going to kind of push there as well. Like it's, you know, the gigabyte blocks is where we're headed. You know, but perhaps we ought to figure out how we get the what is it, 4 megabits,
The demand,
you know, filled up first.
Yeah. And you know what? That's totally fair. And we are really actively incubating and working with teams. And frankly, I would say objectively, this is the best time there's ever been to be a builder of applications in crypto, because there is like a totally new unlock of like features and functionality that just did not exist before. And it's not just, you know, scaling. Like scaling is not the thing that's like going to unlock more users, but like things like chain abstraction and embedded wallets and all these things that are just making the user experience and developer experience so much easier are going to enable completely new use cases. So anyway, like I'm super bullish on the next like few years of people innovating on the application layer. So and so why do we need gigabyte blocks? Why do we need scale? Is because I think we're gonna need to scale the existing applications in crypto that have some degree of product market fit. I genuinely think like over the next 5 years, we're gonna see a crypto payments app go like fully mainstream. And you know, if we want that, we're gonna need a shit ton of TPS, right? If we want like literally, you know, hundreds of millions of users on some like payment app, and hopefully even more in the future, like we're gonna need a lot of throughput, right? Same, I actually also think we can scale DeFi in parallel to that. Once we start to sort of like have adoption of some kind of stablecoin payments thing, we can scale up DeFi to those people, those users, right? And all those things are going to take, just that alone, you're going to need a shitload of block space, right? Next is enable, and like there's other, you know, use cases that already have product market fit that I think we'll need to scale up. The next thing is that we can enable new applications, right? So one is just the fact that we can now do like high performance L2s like Eclipse and movement and actually start to push the boundaries of execution and see where that leads to. Like Eclipse and movement can actually probably push their performance beyond even a Solana, right? That wasn't possible to do before. You couldn't just like spin up a Solana scale type of network. Where would you deploy it? would you deploy it on Solana? Would you deploy it on Ethereum? Like Celestia's throughput is going to be so vast that you can actually support multiple networks of that size. And so I think there's going to be like a lot more. It's going to just enable this fundamental innovation at the execution layer. And we're seeing a lot of cool apps like on-chain AI. Like there's this team, Open Gradient, who's been building on top of Rollkit. And just I think a week ago, they were showing how they're publishing the data that allows for like verifiable inferences to be run on chain. And like, again, I don't think, first of all, you need the customizability of modularity, and then you're going to need a lot of DA to do that at scale. So that like there's going to be a whole class of new applications that we couldn't build because we were just so constrained. So I think it's a combination of those two things. And like, again, just to like sort of wrap up, like ultimately the infrastructure layer's job, in my view, is always to be ahead of the curve, right? Because growth and the growth of adoption is not a linear thing, right? We might be in this flat zone right here, but dude, in 6 months or a year, we could be hitting a crazy inflection point. And so it's Celestia's job to always have an overabundance, right? And to be way ahead of the curve, a few steps ahead, so that when that happens, we don't have, and people are getting all excited about some new crypto app, right? Your mom and your dad or whoever, people around the world. It's not like it just fails. It hits a scale fail, right? We've been through that multiple times. And I'm hoping that for this next wave of crypto adoption, maybe we can avoid that. Maybe we can actually have a super cycle after all, because we won't have, I'm just kidding about that. But yeah, that's the way that I see it.
No, I mean, I hear you. It resonates big time on like DeFi Summer 2020 on Ethereum. Had Rollups been where they are today. And then I would also maybe add where Interop, and perhaps in the next 6 months, where I think some of these chain abstraction solutions are going to get to, then I think the experience that we would have had onboarding people in kind of like, that time would have been way different, and the outcome would have been way different. So definitely agree on the infrastructure pace side. And I think that's a good framing for the vision, as well as kind of like growing demand over time. Now, kind of a bit more into the actual process of getting to the 1 gigabyte blocks. Obviously, there's quite a bit of technical requirements to kind of get there. I think one specific thing that we're curious about, and I think that this is probably one of the larger technical challenges, is kind of how you foresee this roadmap towards 1 gigabyte blocks, while keeping the Celestia node requirements manageable, especially as you guys are looking to do improvements to the data availability sampling aspect, as well as thinking about internally sharding these nodes. Talk to us kind of a bit how this kind of challenge is going to be tackled, and how you plan to scale this while making sure that the internal tech stays strong and kind of reduces tech debt.
There's a lot to unpack. Scaling is not easy. One of the advantages that Celestia has in terms of scaling are two things. One, it's just a data availability network. There's no execution, right? So when you're trying to scale something that is actually like a monolithic chain, there's so many more moving parts and so many things you have to optimize for. And when you remove execution, it just becomes a much simpler problem, where it's just like, we need to propagate data and synchronize data, and we need to publish and allow people publish like the block and allow people to sample from it. So it's still a really hard problem, but it's like a significantly simpler thing than trying to scale a monolithic chain. And that's a massive advantage. And it also means that that's why we can exceed the throughput of any monolithic chain. That's why I believe we're going to be able to have the throughput that is equivalent to like multiple Solanas, right? So the main bottlenecks are kind of like, if you look at the roadmap, there's a consensus track and there's a DA network track. The consensus side, like DA is really like a bandwidth constrained thing, because again, it's all about like sending and receiving data and synchronizing it and stuff like that. And so one of the big bottlenecks right now in Celestia's implementation is just gossiping. So gossiping transactions in the mempool, gossiping the blocks. There's just a lot of redundancy and unnecessary overhead. And so we're going to be doing like a series of different upgrades that basically will reduce the overhead on the bandwidth for gossiping across the network, and that's going to make it so that as you reduce that overhead, let's say it's like 15 times to like only 2 times or whatever, you get a huge unlock of like, now we can produce just way bigger blocks with the same amount of resources. So that's one of the really, really big things.
And Nick, just to clarify on that, just briefly, that's like light nodes like gossiping amongst each other, as well as with the more like full nodes in the system. And there's a redundancy in the amount of kind of confirmations and messaging and gossiping happening. And you're basically saying that that through these upgrades, we can reduce the amount of redundant kind of communication to effectively scale more or less.
So actually, I'm specifically talking about the consensus nodes, not the light nodes. It's the consensus nodes themselves that are building the blocks, gossiping these big blob transactions and whatever. They're just like not efficiently using their bandwidth resources. And so that means that like to create a 2 megabyte block, they're using just like, 10 times the amount of bandwidth that they could if we optimize it more. And then when you reduce the amount of bandwidth overhead, all of a sudden you can basically translate all that into building a bigger block, more or less. So it's more about the consensus node side. There are improvements to the light node sampling stuff. So there's a big upgrade coming, not in Lemongrass, but actually in the future, maybe in a few months, called Swap on the DA side. And so the DA side of the network, what we need to optimize really is storage overhead. So right now, we already did pruning, right? So pruning enables people to only have to store, 30 days or so of data on the network. And after that, they can just like delete the rest of it. So they can just follow the HIPAA chain. You don't have like this storage that just grows indefinitely as more and more time goes on. So that's a big one. And then this swap that I was mentioning is something that overhauls the whole sort of like storage implementation of the DA network. And it's going to be, they claim a 15x improvement on storage. So that means like the DA nodes can, make that much more efficient use of their storage. So like if you have, 2 megabyte blocks, like you might have, you have to store like, I don't know, let's say 10 megabytes of data, whereas before it used to be like 100 megabytes or some crazy amount of overhead. So that's going to be really big. And that also makes light nodes lighter, because light nodes are already, very light on bandwidth. We want them to be really light on storage as well. So those are some big things. And you also mentioned node sharding, which is sort of like the final, it's like the end game for scaling the consensus network, where we can actually have one consensus node. It looks like a single node from the outside, but inside there are actually multiple machines that are in parallel, doing the coordination of gossiping transactions and things like that to build a block super efficiently, and sort of allows you to parallelize and like add more bandwidth resources essentially to a consensus node. So that's like the real end game.
Awesome. One confusion that I think that we've fielded from the community as well as just kind of thought about is the kind of the big picture message is 1 gigabyte blocks, and that's where we're kind of heading. However, we're trying to figure out what the actual target like throughput of this is, because right now the blocks, if you look on Selenium, every 12 seconds they go through. You can actually watch the little ticker slide, which is kind of funny. But what's the actual target throughput of these 1 gigabyte blocks? Is it 1 gigabyte every 12 seconds? Is it per 1 second? Like what is the end game on the target throughput?
So you're right. Like saying a block size in absence of clarifying what the block time is kind of meaningless, right? Because like, Bitcoin has 4 megabyte blocks, right? Whereas Celestia only has 2 megabyte blocks. The difference is Bitcoin's block time is every 10 minutes, right? And Celestia's is every 12 seconds. So even though the block size of Bitcoin is bigger, it's at like, orders of magnitude less DA throughput. So when we say gigabyte blocks, that is assuming, this 12-second block time that we have. And so that target throughput ends up being something like 83 megabytes per second. roughly of DA throughput. And, we can just kind of like squint and like round that up to 100 megabytes per second of DA throughput, I think is like a reasonable, memorable like target for the DA throughput. And it's interesting that you brought that up too, because one of the other goals and is included in the roadmap is a desire to reduce the block times of Celestia. And so I think that's something that like we'll continue to sort of shave off the latency. And that would be enabled by things like separating the consensus from the DA network, in terms of you can have these faster consensus blocks and then only build the data square at a lower frequency. Because the reason why we don't want to have super fast DA blocks is that the more of those blocks you have, the more sampling overhead there is. Whereas if you have one less frequent, larger block, the overhead for light nodes to sample and verify it, is much smaller. So those are that's sort of the way to think about the target throughput.
Sweet. So we're in a world in the future of, almost 100 megabits per second on Celestia. And we kind of touched on this a little bit, but curious, if you have anything concrete here, or perhaps just a little bit into the vision. And I think we want to dive into some of the stuff that we talked to Justin Drake about, as well as some of the ZK accounts here. But kind of lasting on this 1 gigabyte blocks conversation as the overarching point. This gets us to a point where, and you've said this previously on streams and even earlier today about, entering this fiber optic era of blockchains and kind of handling many Visa networks worth of transactions in parallel. What kind of apps do you see this unlocking that were previously considered perhaps unfeasible, or just in the current times just aren't going to be able to work without this kind of level of data availability, scale, and throughput?
So I think I would kind of go back to what I was saying, which is we'll be able to support, the traditional apps that everyone has wanted and thought, would be great, product market fit for crypto, like payments, even decentralized finance, obviously, at scale for the first time. Because I don't even think, frankly, that Solana could actually handle a, global scale like payments and DeFi type network. I think we're going to need like a shitload more throughput than even the fastest monolithic chains today. So I think that's like one of the big ones. And then I think we're going to end up with just enabling things that we didn't think you could do on chain. Like one of the things that's was really cool to see was this Chopin framework built by Modular Cloud. And essentially what it's doing is it takes your standard Web 2 application, and it's like, runs in JavaScript or whatever, and it just turns it into a rollup. And like that would not be possible. Well, first of all, you need something like modularity, but second of all, like none of those applications were written in the way that you would if you were like building something to run on a constrained system, right? But by having this abundance, it's like, oh, I don't even have to care about that anymore. I can just publish my data for my application that is like just a total Web 2 type thing, and now all of a sudden it's verifiable. So we can bring more and more things that you wouldn't even expect on chain. The on-chain AI example is a really interesting one. AI is all the rage. I think there's probably some really cool things to emerge from that. I think it's still very early. And I like the mega ETH people were talking about something interesting, which is like when you have this abundant throughput, you could even just build applications differently, where you have like assertions within your own, so like smart contract or your application to make it harder. So like if there's a bug or there's a hack, like it becomes more secure because your application before actually completing something just does some checks to make sure like, is there anything weird happening here? If it is, actually, let's just cancel this. So you can start to have better security as a side effect of this, right? I think this is like the thing that like all these base level infrastructure things are just meant to remove the constraints so that people can just start to think out of the box. And I think if I had the answer of like what is the the new application that's going to come out of this is going to like blow everyone away. That's like really the $1 billion question, and I think that's why we need to attract a new cohort of people who are like excited. Yeah, you never know. Like when Ethereum was launched, right? No one, maybe some people thought about DeFi, but like no one could have predicted it, right? Like you can't know in advance. Like this, it's just like a fundamentally like creative thing where once it's there and it's obvious in retrospect, but beforehand you don't really know. And so someone out there is gonna like for sure take advantage of this and build something that's gonna really I think just kind of open our eyes to what's possible in this new paradigm.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that. I realized that we touched on that in the beginning a bit, but good to kind of hear some new ideas in there as well. I think a lot of people are curious about applications and kind of what this enables, and keeping the infrastructure ahead of the game will eventually enable that these ideas as well as these applications. So one of the kind of other aspects of the roadmap is this idea of verifiable blockspace, and specifically my first somewhat pointed question here is, from what I've heard, using fraud proofs like what Celestia does for data availability sampling is, like in many cases of optimistic versus ZK, is somewhat subpar to using validity proofs. Now, Celestia was able to go live very quickly, get the fraud proof mechanism for data availability sampling out, and kind of thus grow market share. But there's now this kind of trend towards, okay, is it possible for Celestia to, do something like decreasing the fraud proof window as you guys improve reconstruction performance, or even eventually replace fraud proofs with validity proofs, which some of the other data availability providers are I think you guys might be the only one using fraud proofs. So kind of how are you guys thinking about this with regards to fraud proofs and validity proofs? And then, we can tie this into the light node and verifiability conversation.
So the whole fraud proof thing, let me just sort of explain it to the audience, like what we're talking about, because it is a little bit technical. So essentially, in order to enable data availability sampling, you have to erasure code the block data, the original like transaction data that you're trying to publish. The thing is, the block producer can actually extend or like encode that data in a way that's actually malicious, so that even if you had all the data, you couldn't reconstruct the original block. So part of the security model for data availability sampling is you have to have a way to make sure that the encoding is done correctly. You can either do that via fraud proofs or via validity proofs, such that like there's no way to commit to data that was not encoded properly, right? So in Celestia's case, we just do Reed-Solomon encoding, and we have a fraud proof mechanism such that if the block producer does it maliciously, a honest full node can just send out a fraud proof to all the light nodes and say, hey, look, you can see that this is wrong. Don't trust this block, right? In, let's say, Ethereum, like dank sharding, their approach is to use KZG commitments, and that has the property of like you can't like fake it, basically. So it's valid, right? You just know by default. And so there's a lot of trade-offs here, right? So like KZG commitment. So really, what's the difference is that there's two things. A fraud proof makes the finality window slower. So after you sample, right, you still have to wait for a certain amount of time before you like to make sure that you don't see a fraud proof, right? Your light node has to wait, and that fraud proof window is not that long, but it's long enough to make the latency slower, right? The validity proof side, obviously you have, it's just like a ZK rollup, you have instant finality. Now the downside is that the like KZGs and a lot of these approaches to do like validity proved, like erasure coding are slower and a lot higher overhead, right? Whereas like Reed-Solomon encoding and stuff is like just really highly optimized. And for us, that trade-off was better. And it was just too early to try to sort of bet on something like KZGs. Even though there's been a lot of improvement in the performance and whatnot, it's still too early. Unfortunately, we can swap that out when we're ready, when we think that something has come along that is like, it's the same way that optimism can upgrade to, ZK proving. Like, I think Succinct was just talking about how they're like already building like a ZK proved, OP stack type thing. Right. So I think it's just a matter of like adopting it when it's ready. One of the really interesting new technologies out there is called Frida, which is promises to solve that problem and also even make commitment sizes and then like the overhead for sampling for light nodes significantly smaller. So I think it's better to, like, in this case, wait until we see the right technology come out and be like, okay, this is a massive upgrade. It's like a no-brainer. Let's do that.
Welcome to the Ignition, Mantle's newest campaign to liberate the growth power of Bitcoin. FBTC Ignition has officially begun with a total token supply of over 2,000 FBTC with a TVL of over 150 million. Right now, you can go on the FBTC website to see all of the featured campaigns, staking opportunities, and liquidity pools where you can utilize FBTC on-chain today for some of the best yields available on L2s. The Ignition Sparkle campaign can be found at fbtc.com/ongoing-campaign.
Yeah, and you guys, I think, have done a really great job of making running a light node very, very easy. Like, even Modular Summit, you could scan a QR code and you could see the blocks, and you guys had it on projectors and TV screens, and you could literally see it happening. And I think this is very core to the crypto ethos dating back to Satoshi, where don't trust, verify was a philosophy that there he goes. Light node right on the phone.
Light node right
It's
now.
easy.
I literally just booted up on my phone.
Lumina.
Let's see. Starting to sample, baby.
So there it is. Right there on the phone. Running
so people
on.
want to try this. Lumina.rs. You can run
Lumina,
you can run on your laptop, any browser. It's a light node that is natively embedded in your browser. Hats off to the Eiger team who built this. But yeah, I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, I mean, like,
that's a
goal,
perfect,
right?
So that's a perfect example. Yeah, please.
A lot of people will talk about, okay, well, light nodes, they're not incentivized, right? Why can't we incentivize light nodes? Because they're not Sybil resistant. So anyone could just go out there and, run thousands of light nodes and like take all the rewards for themselves, right? And they're not really contributing to the security of the network. So light nodes are not incentivized. So then they're like, oh, well, who's going to run them? You know what I mean? And the reality, and it's true that it's a problem. If I had to actually open a terminal window, I mean, I do it because I'm me, but if my mom or I don't know, whoever your friend who's not crypto native had to open a terminal window and run a light node and whatever, just so they could verify the application, I feel like unless they had a ton of like value, which I think in the future we will have a ton of value on chain, they probably wouldn't bother doing it, right? They're just too lazy. People are lazy, right? Lazy ledger. And the goal of light nodes is that not only now is it's already extremely low resource, so you can run it anywhere. You can run it on a phone, you can run it on a Kindle, you can run it. People run them on all these different devices, right? So we have that down, but it's still a pain from a user perspective to actually boot one up. And eventually, so the beauty of Lumina is that it is embeddable into browsers, is embeddable into mobile applications and front ends, and that means that a user doesn't have to have any technical knowledge. You don't even have to like click a button. It's just you load the page and you're already running a light node. And the vision that I have, or that we, like the Celestia community has for the long term, is that in the future, in the same way that HTTPS, when you're using the internet, you see the little padlock and it tells you like this connection is secure, this website is secure, your data is not going to be leaked to someone, and you feel safe using those things. We're going to have a similar thing for on-chain applications, except it's going to be powered by light nodes. You're going to have a padlock saying like, you are verifying this. There's no shady stuff happening here. It's all like secure and you can trust it. Right. And that's really like the end game. And like, even I can imagine like a browser or your wallet, if you connect to something where you're not running light node or you're not able to verify it directly, it can like, pop up a thing. Same thing with HTTPS, where it says like, warning, you're entering a site that like is not secure. So like, you sure you want to do this? I think we should actually strive for that kind of user experience in the end game, because that's what Web3 is all about. It's about verifiability. That's how you as a user can be, safe, know that your funds are not going to be, stolen by a committee or validator set or whoever. And it's what differentiates crypto and blockchains from Web2 applications. That you as a user can verify it and know from top to bottom everything is legit. And that's why we can trust these systems with billions of dollars, in the future trillions of dollars, right? And a lot of people are like, oh, well, no one's demanding this level of decentralization and verifiability. And so, yeah, they're not doing that yet, because we're playing in like the kiddie pool sandbox version of crypto, right? Like where we want to go is the entire world economy is on chain, right? Like the deed of your house is on chain, all these things, like so much of the world, in the same way that so much of the world is now online on the internet. That's the same vision that we have for blockchains and the on-chain world. And when we're at that scale, we're going to want these things to be ultra secure. And I'm not going to want to just like have my life savings and not be able to like verify that thing is safe, So yeah, we're going to need that for where we're trying to go.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I heard Jeremy Allaire, the founder of Circle, kind of speaking to the level of scale in terms of some of these capital markets that he anticipates, not just stable coins as the total addressable market for stable coins, but value in general is at the order of hundreds of trillions of dollars. And how, yeah, it's okay for us to use multi-sigs and centralized sequencers, but when we're talking about global economy scale and trillions of dollars, these corporations and governments are not okay with centralized sequencers and literally like single digit number of individuals on a multi-sig. Like there's too much key man risk in order to leverage those systems. And so I think on the order of decentralization, it does make sense. And you guys have done a tremendous job of making the hardware requirements of running a light node so low. I think there is still somewhat of a knowledge gap where someone comes to the light node and it's very easy for them to get there, but someone looks at it and they're like, what am I looking at? And I think some of the features like a padlock that you're mentioning, someone who's non-technical can still, and verifiability is like a fractal. So like you can always verify one level deeper and one level deeper until you get into the literal hardware that you're using, right? But I think kind of bridging the knowledge gap so that when a rather non-technical person does pull up a light node to verify their transaction, it's as easy to read as maybe a block explorer, and making it easy for general populations to interpret what they're seeing on the light node so that it is easier to verify and we have just less trust in the system.
Completely. So one thing that I'll say is, if we think about, nation states and economies, right? There's this tendency for the most robust economies to form in the countries that have the most robust and fair rule of law and property rights and all these things, right? And the equivalent for that, like blockchains are like kind of like little like governments or little like economies on the internet, right? And for the same reason you wouldn't like, it's hard to start a business in a corrupt, third world country because like, oh, it turns out the dictator's just going to come and rug you, right? It's the same thing for blockchains. Like the more decentralized they are, the more fair and the more credibly neutral the rule of law is on that chain, the more that your rights are going to be upheld. And you can believe in that and trust in that. The more secure that foundation is, the more people are going to want to invest there. The more businesses are going to want to be started there. So that's like I really think that this is like, it's crazy when people are like, oh, well, no one cares about decentralization. And it's just like so short-sighted to me. But the other thing that like people forget too is that if you rewind the clock, and I actually really recommend people to watch C-Node, Colluding Node, Connor's talk at Modular Summit about light nodes. But people forget that back in the day when Bitcoin was early, when Ethereum was early, the way that you interacted with the chain was you ran a light node. Or sorry, not a light node. You ran a node on your computer. And then as things like progressed, people got lazier and lazier. It became impractical, for example, I can't run a Ethereum light node on my laptop, right? It would just take too much compute and bandwidth and whatever. But like the blockchains actually used to be fully peer-to-peer, and they used to be genuinely verifiable, and that used to be the default user behavior. It's just that we got lazy. Now we rely on RPCs that we trust to serve us the right state, that we trust to relay our transactions. And what we believe in is actually returning back to this original cypherpunk vision where you're fully verifying by default as a user. You aren't, interacting with the chain via an RPC. You are actually, it's fully peer-to-peer. And that's, again, like all in service of this, building this truly credibly neutral peer-to-peer, trust minimized global system that we can all invest in and build a on-chain internet native economy on.
Yeah, I think that rings pretty close to home for Robbie here, who found himself downloading the entire Ethereum blockchain, I believe, to engage in his first crypto experience in high school, and then realized that back in 2016 that downloading an entire blockchain on your MacBook isn't exactly the best way to use your storage space. So props for the idea of light nodes coming to the market.
That is a true story.
Nick, we just have a couple more minutes. I want to talk about ZK accounts in the lens of the podcast that we recently had with Justin Drake. And I think you'll find it fascinating if you haven't seen it. But towards the end, I asked him about the data availability roadmap and the data focused roadmap of Ethereum. And he actually brought up Celestia. And I mean, he rightfully so spoke about Celestia in high regard, but also in some sort of a competitive lens, in the sense where he came to the conclusion that he is confident that Ethereum is going to be the end game for data availability. With the rise of ZK accounts on the roadmap, we there can be an argument that can be made that ZK accounts are adding settlement to Celestia. And I think the original vision, and the vision still is, for Celestia to help scale Ethereum and kind of this modular ecosystem. But I think my question is, are ZK accounts at all threatening to Ethereum? Is this engaging in more competitive kind of long-term outlook than you may have previously kind of anticipated when you guys were creating Celestia? And perhaps we can even touch on as well just kind of how ZK accounts and lazy bridging work first, and then maybe that'll help to kind of pave the answer for our community as well.
Cartesi is your home for app-specific rollups. At the forefront of developing new tools and platforms that enhance the capabilities of blockchain technology, Cartesi enables applications that are flexible and built to scale. Build on a full Linux environment and use traditional software libraries, but in blockchain development. Go to cartesi.io, that's cartesi.io, to learn more about building your own app chain today.
So the first thing I'll say is modularism, not maximalism. And I genuinely mean that, in that it's not zero sum. And I believe two things. One is we need all the DA that we can get, all the like verifiable, genuinely decentralized DA that we can get, the more the merrier. And I think, so like it's great to have both Celestia and both Ethereum scaling DA, right? And Celestia genuinely has been helping and will continue to help the broader Ethereum ecosystem to scale the DA throughput. I actually think there's a lot of people who I think 4844 has been great, right? But it's very likely that it's going to get saturated before they're able to ship Petra and like increase the blob sizes, a number of blobs and whatever. And so like Celestia is here to help make sure that the broader Ethereum ecosystem doesn't get screwed over when that happens, if that happens, I should say. And so like Celestia is there, hopefully with abundant throughput to enable any L2s or L3s to shift over their DA when they need to, right? So and also just with another modular not maximalism thing and like build whatever, the mentality is like the more choices developers have, the better. And I don't think that there necessarily has to be one DA that is strictly more optimal than another, right? They're all going to make different trade-offs. I think that there probably will be consolidation in the market, like long term. So I agree with Justin on that. But like Ethereum's value proposition as DA layer is like completely different to Celestia's. They've made just totally different design decisions. Whether that is like the fact that they have a fully stateful execution layer that can serve as settlement. It can actually just do execution. Some people in the Ethereum community apparently want to scale execution, right? They're starting to think, wow, why are we doing this rollup centric roadmap focusing on DA? And Solana's eating our lunch kind of thing, right? So Ethereum fundamentally it might be more monolithic in the long term, right? The DA network itself uses KGGs. The blob sizes are bigger. Celestia's blob sizes, you can have a much smaller blob. So like there's all these like differences, I would say, that mean that different developers are going to choose different DA layers because they just offer different trade-offs essentially. Now, what I will say is that Celestia has had the advantage of being able to start from scratch, right, and be fully optimized for this end game modular thing. We don't have. That's why we would have as minimal amount of state or execution on the base layer as possible. And I still continue to think that is what is going to matter long term. So anyway, you asked about ZK accounts, right? And this notion of lazy bridging. There is a lot more to come on that, but like a much bigger story to be told in the future. But like to touch on it briefly, people probably have heard about ZK accounts. What they are is it's a way to, Celestia has no smart contracts, right? On purpose, because we want to keep the layer one minimal, so that when you're building a rollup, you don't have to run a full node that like re-executes all this and has all this state and stuff like that. Like running your rollup should inherit minimum amount of overhead from the underlying DA layer. So and so there's no smart contracts, which is it's a power, but it's also a weakness, because it means that, for example, we can't have a fully verifying trust minimized bridge from Celestia to the rollups built on top of it, right? There's no way for us to implement a bridge that can verify a rollup fraud proof or ZK proof, right? And so right now we're stuck in this space where Celestia can bridge TIA via IBC to another chain, which then can, that has smart contracts or has some other bridging functionality enabled, that it can bridge to these other rollups. So it creates this kind of like, I don't know, kind of web and like more trust assumptions when you're trying to route the TIA token to the rollup ecosystem. And the ZK accounts, the first thing that it's going to enable is what is it, by the way? So ZK accounts are a new sort of like ability for the Celestia base chain to verify ZK proofs. And so there's no smart contracts or anything like that, but it kind of gives you the same type of functionality as if you were adding like execution to the base layer, but there's minimal amount of state and minimal amount of execution happening. And so what this enables, for example, is you can have a bridge to a rollup where you route TIA through this like ZK account, and then the TIA can be bridged up. And when you want to bridge it back down, this ZK account can verify a ZK proof that says, okay, this amount of funds is being bridged back, essentially. So that's kind of square one and the original motivation for it. It also can unlock things like more trust minimized liquid staking protocols or restaking, et cetera. People can build things like privacy enabled things. And but there's sort of like this broader vision of, right, like the fragmentation of modular chains. And you guys have done a ton of work and a ton of episodes, which I've watched, about chain abstraction, intents, all these like really interesting technical concepts that are going to make it so that all these different chains feel more unified. And ZK accounts can play a role in that by enabling kind of like creating this way of routing assets between rollups in a trust minimized and sort of like one-stop shop type of way. Again, we're still sort of crafting the full story, but that's sort of like the broad strokes kind of vision for where we can go from here.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing like that native TIA movement around the sovereign rollup and Celestia ecosystem. Powered by ZK accounts soon. I know that's been kind of on the forefront of y'all's focus for some time, and then also something looking forward to seeing TIA out in the Initiate ecosystem and kind of seeing how that kind of interoperates and kind of spreading the TIA asset itself around through different parts of the modular stack and different ecosystems. And I think we totally agree with regards to we need more DA. Right now, it's still very much like a on-chain versus off-chain, less so. It's not Ethereum versus Solana or Celestia versus Ethereum versus Avail versus Eigenlayer. It's like us versus all of the amazing builders that are going to try to come on and build really innovative apps, as well as just bring on the outside world on-chain. And as always, there's different trade-offs with those different designs. Generally, I think that the roadmap was pretty well received by the community, and this has been an absolutely great episode unpacking everything that has came of it, from the tech to the vision to kind of how you guys are thinking about the imminent next steps, the community, and kind of answered some tough questions quite well. So appreciate you joining us, man, and I'll see you in Singapore. And thanks for joining.
I appreciate it, guys. This was an awesome conversation. As usual, you guys have just been complete leaders, I think, in the modular ecosystem, helping to explain what's going on to everyone out there. And I just really appreciate it. And thanks for your interest in Celestia, and looking forward to hopping back on at some point, maybe next year, when maybe we've scaled the block size, which I think is coming imminently. So there'll be a lot more to talk about, I'm sure.
Let's go. 4 megabits soon, 8 megabits, and 1 gigabyte eventually. So thanks, Nick.
Block size is up only.